said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull. So then we watched the building collapse.
They ignored it because they wanted it to happen. Every void starts with a false flag operation.
Skill to do comes of doing. Knowledge comes by eyes always open and working hands. And there is no knowledge that is not power. Ralph Waldo Emerson, 1870. Hello, and welcome to Historica Esoterica. I am Roswell, and I'm joined by my friend...
Matt K. Ultra.
Matt, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. We're recording this seconds after finishing our episode 0.
Exactly.
From our listeners' perspective, at least. Who knows how long it has been for us? But
yeah.
Forces conspired to keep this podcast down, but we will not let them stop us.
Dark forces, perhaps.
Dark force. Well, we'll get into that.
Who's to say?
Who's to say?
We have a fascinating topic today, and I'm excited about it. We're talking about Grimoires, essentially a history of magic books. And so right off the bat, I figure we should just give an overview explanation of what they are. So
yeah, for sure.
What is a Grimoire, Matt?
So in the tabletop role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, no. So a grimoire, they serve various purposes, but it's effectively just a magic book, like you said.
Right.
Like usually they're spell books, like the ones that I read, which we'll get into later, they're very much spell books. They're all about spirits and how you contact them. But there's also ones that like show you how to make like magical amulets, or I imagine potions. I don't know if that is a separate thing.
No,
but yeah,
absolutely.
any guide to magic and general occulted things. That's what a grimoire is,
right?
Broadly speaking.
Yes, and I like this quote from Owen Davies, who wrote Grimoires, A History of Magic Books. He said that they are, quote, repositories of human knowledge that arm people against evil spirits and witches, heal their illnesses, fulfill their sexual desires, divine and alter their destiny, and much else besides, end quote. So it's kind of a broad topic, but the essential idea is magic books.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's a little more pro grimoire than me, but it's
that's
a good general description.
Yes, well, and I think the thing we're going to notice is when we kind of look at this from a bird's eye view and we look through different time periods, the perception of a grimoire in terms of positive or negative is going to change culture to culture. Mm-hmm. Which we'll get into. But yes, they had a variety of uses. The one I found funniest was to fulfill their sexual desires. So people have been trying to, do penis and lengthening since the dawn of time. So
it's good
humans
to know
really haven't changed that much.
Yeah, it's good to know that the prototypical guy who's really into magic hasn't changed.
Yeah, it's the same type of guy. Yeah. So that's basically what it is. And I wanted to briefly talk about, like, in our cultural understanding, like if you say grimoire, what most people are going to think of is either fantasy, like Dungeons and Dragons, spell book, or if they're maybe a little more, I don't want to say a little more learned, but just a little more familiar with the topic, they might think Aleister Crowley, dark magic, and some more seedy things. So that's kind of our perspective as Americans living in 2022 of what a grimoire is.
And for the listeners, that's also currently my perspective. Roswell's done some more research and will be educating both you and me at once as we go on their history.
Well, and I think it's important to understand that this as a concept obviously has evolved over the thousands of years of recorded human history. So, of course, the perception's going to evolve, and as cultures and countries change, that'll,
Yeah.
change too. So
Yeah,
I
it's
just
well
think it's
put.
important to note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you made that note, because I'd also like to say, just off the bat, like you'll find I am generally very, as we go, I'm generally very suspicious or cautious around these things.
Yes.
But as it's especially in the context of like white Americans doing like ritual magic is where I am the most suspicious. Like if it's like, a Native American ritual, I'm not going to be there like they're communing with devils, folks. But
Right.
Folks, I'm not going to be doing my Alex Jones.
You're gonna be jonesing out.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
when we're talking about like powerful Americans doing it, that's where I want to direct most of my ire. And otherwise, I'll try to be a little more fair and
Yeah.
balanced.
And here's the thing: is I tend to agree with you. I'll say that in summation, I tend to agree with you. But that leads nicely into my first question for you, Matt, which is, do you believe in magic?
Yeah, actually, this is a really interesting question, because I am.
Yes.
Some of our mutual friends know that I have a pretty deep interest in Alan Moore, and that translated to an interest in chaos magic, which is something that I have never fully been in favor of, but I've definitely been very interested in. And while I'm suspicious of it, I do fundamentally agree with that form of magic's worldview, right? That like your belief shapes your reality.
Interesting.
And I think, I don't know if I necessarily literally believe that you can like contact a spirit and have it do things for you, but I am very wary of doing so regardless. Like I think it's something you should be very careful of. Like that, was it Christopher Lee, that quote that I found that I sent you, the one where he's like, you will not only lose your mind, you'll lose your soul. Like,
and if Count Dooku is saying that,
yeah,
you better listen.
You gotta be careful, man. Saruman's telling you not to do magic,
right?
Like
Count Dracula. Got a lot of counts.
Yeah, he's. But yeah, that's my general take. What about you? How do you view magic?
I think I agree with you that I'm cautious about it, and maybe for the same reasons, maybe for different reasons. I think it definitely, if you're getting into magic, it puts you in bed with strange bedfellows, at the very least. In the most practical view, the most pragmatic view, if I was to say, on a scientific level, I don't believe in magic. But if you're practicing magic and if you're running in those circles, it puts you in a strange spot. So I would tend to caution people. That being said, if there is any chance that there is anything beyond our physical reality, why are you trying to contact forces of evil?
Yeah,
why would you open yourself up to that?
Yeah, come on, dude. Like, it's, I don't know. I find a lot of, modern Satanism, at least in our Western context, you have like your two camps. Most of them, I think, are just edgy atheists. Right?
Reddit Satanists.
Yeah, exactly. Like Reddit Satanists. Yeah. And I find those ones in particular frustrate me a lot, because they'll like do these things that have very powerful like occult significance and like actual magical rituals.
Right.
Just, LOL, but it's just for fun. Like I just signed my soul over to him, but it's not a big deal. It's like, I mean, I don't know, man. Like, Pascal's wager might not be super convincing to me, but I'm not so not convinced by it that I'd run the gauntlet of signing my soul to Satan. But
yes. And at the very least, I think especially in our culture, like symbolism and like meaning has sort of lost all meaning in the information age. So like people just don't put any value in that anymore, which I personally, from a philosophical standpoint, disagree with. Like I wouldn't even want to, if I didn't believe it was like a true contract, I still wouldn't want to say, yeah, I'm signing my soul to the devil. Because that means like, is that how I value myself? Like that I would literally sign my autonomy over to the embodiment of evil. Does that make sense?
No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's very weird to both like mock the Scientologists signing their like 10 million year contract or whatever they do, and then immediately go like, but the Church of Satan rocks. It's like, well, I don't know.
Yeah,
I think,
exactly.
And there's maybe more connections with those two religions than
Ooh.
most people know, but we'll get into that on some
Preview.
other episode. Yeah, preview for episode 200.
Yeah.
but-
So I think that's the distillation of both of our beliefs is I think it comes down to be careful
yeah.
at the very least.
And
And-
don't take it from me. Take it from Aleister Crowley, who in the, just to jump ahead slightly, in like the Greater Key of Solomon, there's all sorts of stuff where he's like, you gotta be careful, buddy. Like, don't just go about this casually. It's like, all right, well, if you want to commune with evil spirits, take it from the self-proclaimed wickedest man in the world, and don't do this lightly.
Yeah, exactly. So that being said, let's jump into, I wanted to just briefly brush over what the word grimoire means and where it comes from, the etymology, not to get
Yeah,
dorky,
for sure.
but I love that stuff. So I thought it was interesting that there's kind of two main theories as to where the word grimoire comes from. One's more accepted, one's kind of an archaic theory. But the first one is that in the early 19th century, it was thought to come from the Italian word rimario,
Okay.
which just references a book of rhymes or Bible verses. But the more common belief is that the term grimoire originates from Old French, the word grammaire, which you can probably assume what that means. It's essentially grammar.
Yeah.
But it kind of had taken on this connotation of being used to refer to any books written in Latin, which is interesting. We'll talk on that later. But by the 18th century, it just kind of came to mean books of magic, or something difficult to read and impossible to understand. I thought that was interesting. So if we consider, again, the modern Western view of Latin as a language, this kind of view makes a lot of sense, since obviously Latin's the progenitor of English, and it evokes thoughts of an old arcane world, and a lot of, knowledge and history from the past we have is written in Latin, obviously. So just from like a kind of a vibes statement, Latin makes us think, ooh, spooky magic in our cultural context.
Weird old European Catholic traditions and things
Exactly.
like that. Which
weird hats, smoke.
Yeah, weird hats and smoke. Which I mean, we each have our criticisms of the Catholic Church, but
oh yes,
in terms of vibes, immaculate. They're really
immaculate
good.
vibes.
They're great at putting out vibes.
Great art, wonderful aesthetic, but yes. So grimoires, that's where the word comes from. They're books of magic. What is magic, right? That's kind of a big question because, again, it really depends on the cultural context. So a grimoire or a book of magic has been basically, from a evidence standpoint, it's existed as long as human history, recorded history has existed, all the way up until now. And so obviously it's going to reflect the times it was written in, in each different culture, in each different time period. So if we string everything together in a chronological line, we can get a pretty interesting look at the development of human culture and humans' relationship with the occult, I should say. So that's kind of what we want to think about when we're looking through all of this, is that, again, I've said it several times already, but it really depends on context, what this is going to mean to the people living at the time and what this is going to mean to us. So ancient times, most people not very literate, right? So books and writings in general were considered to be sacred or to have magical properties, just in general. So someone who knew how to read was probably a person of station in most cultures, pre-modern times, right? So to the illiterate masses, any sort of book or writing or knowledge might have had kind of this magical connotation, which we would take for granted, again, in the information age. But there's huge power in writing.
Oh, yeah. And that's something I do kind of want to explore as we're going through this, is that idea that writing is, go back to my problematic fave, Alan Moore.
Yes.
He's written before about how writing is an inherently magical act, right? Where I can, simply by putting my pen to paper, I can make you think thoughts that I had, like I'm translating directly. Right. And we, like you said, we sort of take that for granted now because most of us can read. There's a possibility that, if you're listening, you can't read. But odds are you can. You can
Yeah.
at least understand most words when you look at them on paper.
Right.
Just because of the fact that we have an education system. It's a lot
Well,
more
and
widespread.
people have to use phones sort of to fit into like modern society,
Yeah.
at least in America now. So like reading's kind of a must.
Yeah, it becomes on some level of like, compositional skill. It becomes
Right.
necessary to function.
Yes.
And so we take that for granted. But yeah, like you're saying, like that was not the case for the majority of human history.
Mhm.
Um,
And that factors heavy into like if we look at, this is separate, but it's kind of a parallel if we look at like Christian or like biblical history, how much the Bible was suppressed to the masses, and wasn't translated from languages that most people didn't read into languages like English the masses read, or would only be read by a select few.
yeah.
It's kind of a similar thing. Information is power. And so it's been considered power from the beginning. So
Mhm.
just want to keep that in mind. That being said, is the Bible a grimoire? Because people consider the Bible to have magical properties itself, right?
Okay, interesting.
It's an interesting question. Most people would probably say no.
No, but
But because it's not telling you spells and incantations. I mean, I guess in like a broad sense, you could say it's a book of knowledge and power, but I think they're two separate things,
yeah.
especially with our current cultural context of what
Mhm.
a spell book is. They're two very different things, but it's an interesting question. All right, so let's take it back to the beginning. Both of us researched the history. We divvied it up well. You did like the 1800s to present time, and I
Yeah.
did the 1800s to the beginning of time. So it was kind of an even.
Yeah, even
Even
split.
divvy.
Yeah, I read
Yeah.
2 books. You read about the entire history of grimoires
Yeah.
as they relate to the world. So
I was reading about cuneiform and the Akkadians, which that's where we'll start. That's the first written record of magic was Akkad, which is obviously Mesopotamia, related to Sumeria. You can find cuneiform tablets of magic spells, gods and demons, that kind of thing. The thing to remember is that these sort of grimoires, this wouldn't have been taboo in the way it is now, right? This would have been sort of a religious rite, because that was religious.
Just a fact of life. Yeah.
Exactly. Jumping forward in time a little bit, we can go to Persia, the Zoroastrians. I always missay that word. But obviously in Persia, they had the Magi, which is where I think that's where the word magic and magician comes from, is magi.
I believe so.
And those
I
were
did not
priests of
research
magic.
this part.
And it's interesting that in ancient Greece, a lot of people thought that the Persians invented magic. Like Pliny the Elder specifically wrote that the Persian magi were the the sole inventors of magic, and that's where magic comes from, is Persia, which I thought was pretty interesting to think that in ancient Greece they're like, yeah, those guys made it up. Like, it's not just something that's been around; it was specifically those guys. If we look at biblical folklore, Enoch is credited as the inventor of books in a lot of Christian tradition. And this belief would have developed around the time of Jesus, before or after, give or take a couple decades. Specifically, we think about like the Book of Enoch found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. What was that? Probably like 90 years before Jesus. I'm forgetting exactly, but there's a lot of that
time period.
That time period of, around the time of Caesar, essentially. So that's sort of the Greek Jewish time period. Egypt also was a leading center of magical arts, especially by the time of Greece. Egypt had a huge magical tradition in their religion. And yeah, so they were kind of been considered a cultural center of magic, especially by the time of Hellenistic Egypt. And a lot of the magic that we'll see in the stuff that you looked into later can be traced back to Greek and Hellenistic, like Egyptian stuff, which I don't know if that came up in what you were reading, But was there any sort of mention to like
Uh,
Egypt and Greece and that sort of stuff?
so I know a bit about Crowley, right? Or Crowley,
Mhm.
however you pronounce it. I'm going to say Crowley because there's a W, and I don't
Yeah.
believe in British pronunciation of things.
And it sounds cooler.
Yeah, exactly. But one of
Yeah.
his first, like, big spiritual things that he wrote about was when he went on a visit to Egypt with his wife, and ended up like receiving the Book of the Law from, I believe, Thoth, if I remember right, who is
Yeah.
the Egyptian god of magic. I don't
Right.
remember if that's who gave it to him, but like his wife like had visions and told him to visit like a specific display at this Egypt museum, number 666, which was
Oh.
yeah, I think it was Thoth, if I'm remembering right. So that doesn't come up in the books that I researched, but yeah, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, like all those guys, they loved Egypt. Egypt was
Yeah.
huge in like Europe in the time when like these things started to make a comeback. So we'll
Absolutely.
get more into that.
Yeah.
back half.
So, and Egypt from the time of ancient Greece, from the time we're seeing a lot of philosophers and like historians, Egypt is regarded as the place for magic.
Mhm.
And you mentioned the Egyptian Book of the Dead, like that.
Yeah.
I think that could be counted as a grimoire. And there's, I don't have any written down, but there's several others from what I can remember in terms of like Egyptian magical books and rites and practices that have been uncovered.
Oh yeah, I mean, like you look at their burial rites, right? Like that is all so deeply magical, even in the way that we use it now, and that's in part, because like Crowley and his ilk, definitely cribbed a lot from that
Yeah.
sort of era. But
Yes.
it's definitely interesting to look at that now. And you're like, oh, these guys, they were on to something, whatever it
Yeah.
was they were doing. There's a lot going on in Egypt
Mhm.
in particular.
And also Marvel's Moon Knight should be noted.
Yeah.
So moving on a bit from Egypt, let's go a little bit back to Israel and Greece. I thought this was a point I found very interesting, which is like outside of like biblical and like Christian narratives, a lot of ancient people, again, this would be around the time of Jesus, regarded Moses as a sorcerer.
Okay.
And this might partially stem from Acts 7:22, which talks about how Moses had all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He was a very well-learned man. And you think, well, all of the wisdom of the Egyptians, they love occult knowledge. Moses had a bunch of
gotta have
occult
some of that.
knowledge. Exactly. And the Greek pagan historian Celsus, I don't know how to say it. I think Celsus. He asserted that Jewish people were, quote, addicted to sorcery taught by Moses, which is a fascinating way to put it. But I also kind of makes sense if we consider like Jewish occult tradition, which
Mhm.
really was picking up like between the, I want to say, 2nd century BCE and then like ramping up into the Common Era.
Oh yeah.
So, for example, there are these 2 surviving papyri dated from the 4th century CE, entitled The Hidden Book of Moses and The Unique or 8th Book of Moses, which is a weird title to me.
Yeah.
They couldn't decide whether it was unique or 8. And these mention, and this is, I don't know if it's the same with what you researched, but this kind of hits on a common note I found with a lot of these magic books, where they mention other lost texts
Mhm.
that they
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have access to. It's like, oh yeah, like this book's cool, but there are other books you don't even know about.
Yeah,
We got
just
so
wait
many
until
books.
wait until
Yeah.
you subscribe to the next tier of my Patreon. and get
Exactly.
these benefits. Like,
Yeah. So specifically, these 2 Mosaic books mention other lost Mosaic texts, like the Key of Moses, the Archangelical Teaching of Moses. Excuse me, this is kind of a tongue twister. The Secret Moon Book of Moses and the 10th Hidden Book of Moses. So
that's
Yeah.
interesting.
So there is some evidence that some of these books existed. The main evidence, obviously, this reference in these grimoires. But yeah, a lot of Moses-related magic from the time of Greek times, from
Yeah.
Greek Hellenistic period.
I don't want to cut you off, but
No,
there's
go
something
ahead.
I'd like to note. In Mormon scripture, there is it's something we don't. Well, not we, but not we anymore. But they don't study it as much. It's something sort of ancillary, however you pronounce that word. You know what I mean.
Yes,
But it's
that's right.
there is a Book of Moses, something that was that Joseph Smith, had written out. It's just sort of like it actually, and it talks about like Enoch as well.
Right.
So I don't know. There's something to put out there. It's
That
just
is interesting.
interesting, yeah, because
Yeah.
the Book of Mormon was supposedly, they say, translated from a form of Egyptian, and so these threads, they
Yeah.
go in lots of different directions. Lots of people in that time period who were into any sort of occult scenes, as say
Right.
Joseph Smith was, they all followed these threads, these connections between old Judaic occultism and Egypt, which for obvious reasons are generally tied together around the
Right.
era of Moses.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's interesting too, because I'll touch on this later. We'll get into Apocrypha's relation to
Oh yeah.
magic, and I think that feeds right into that. But that's very, very interesting. And just to briefly to talk about like what these books contained, the ones we have contain rituals for meeting and questioning gods, plural, just to note, as well as
Interesting.
protection spells from these gods. Again, so just to understand that these are pagan books. They're neither Jewish nor Christian, because it's meeting gods, not
Yeah.
God.
Yeah,
So
not
something interesting.
capital G. These are
Yeah.
small G gods.
This is lowercase g, apostrophe s.
yeah.
So aside from Moses, there's some other biblical characters which get the magical treatment. One we've mentioned earlier, Solomon. It's
Mhm.
a lot of magical texts attributed, probably about as much as Moses. Although evidence of these written texts which are attributed to him places most of these centuries after he would have lived.
Yeah, if something says it was written by Solomon, it absolutely was not. We've
Yeah.
talked about this off mic before. I'm going to give him, unless
He can have Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and some of the Psalms, right? He did some of the Psalms.
and some of the Psalms. But basically what we're saying is, if it isn't in the King James version of the Bible,
Right.
he didn't write it.
And that's true.
And that's true.
No, but I think, anything non-biblical that's attributed to him it is magical. It is apocrypha, occult, a magic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And in both, Abrahamic traditions and more like pagan or explicitly like occult traditions, he's almost always viewed as being, this very wise figure, this very intelligent figure, but someone who, used spirits one way or
Right.
another.
Well, and that's sort of the character, if you can excuse me calling him a character, but that's sort of the character development of Solomon, is that he's very wise, but he's sort of seduced into the dark side of wisdom, and sort of loses himself to pagan gods and strays from the righteous path, right? So that makes sense that, from people's view, they'd be like, well, yeah, he went into this like paganism, so obviously he wrote a bunch of magic books. Like, you can see that connection.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So specifically, we have the Testament of Solomon, which that's a pretty old one. That contains the very famous story of the Seal of Solomon, which you might know about.
Yeah, I've posted that meme about it several times.
Yes. I didn't write this in my notes, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's about Solomon creating some sort of ring to seal away demons.
Yeah, and I believe they're supposed. I was going to read the Testament of Solomon, and then I, to be perfectly frank, forgot to, because I got distracted by the other two. But I believe that the demons who were sealed away are the ones, they're supposed to be the ones who are listed in the Lesser Key of Solomon.
Yes, and they are also listed in this one. Because a thing you'll notice with a lot of these is they love a big list of demons. Because
72, and I read
Yeah.
About 10 of them. I did not read the full list of demons.
Was Asmodeus in there?
Oh yeah, he's. I
Yeah,
think he's like
he's
number
the big
3.
one.
Hang on, let me go find him.
Oh,
I'll
number
find
3.
our boy. Not our boy. Let me be clear.
Not our boy, yeah.
I was
I always get a little spooked out reading the demon names, I'm not gonna lie.
I know he's in here somewhere because I saw
Yeah.
him. I also saw Paimon, like the one from
Oh, yeah.
Hereditary.
Yes.
He shows up, and it's like,
Yep.
oh hey, I
Yep.
know him.
You start to you it's very funny like how many pop culture stuff, and I mean this is for the obvious reason, but like you don't realize that you're like, oh, that's a demon of old that
Yeah,
they're
like,
turning
oh,
into
oh,
a
no.
bad guy. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I jokingly referenced D&D earlier, but it is funny.
Mhm.
A couple of these guys, when I was like reading through the
Oh, yeah.
names, I was like, oh, this is just like a character in Dungeons and
Yeah.
Dragons, and like
Or a monster. you
yeah, or
know?
a monster. Yeah, I don't think D&D is satanic, but
No.
I was reading that and I was like, well, now I see where they were getting it from.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, I
That's
can't find him, but I know he's in there somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a thing we'll notice. Another trend is that they love listing things, specifically demons, which I think is interesting. And I'm partially wondering, this is a personal theory based off of just the surface level connection, but you know, in the scriptures, especially the Hebrew scriptures, there's a lot of lists.
Oh yeah, they
especially
love
of like family names and like
Yeah.
lineage. So I'm wondering if that's just kind of like a aesthetic connection, maybe.
Mhm.
Could be. I don't know. But yeah, so this Testament of Solomon, it was massively influential on the upcoming medieval occultism, and obviously, from what we can tell, the occultism that you were reading about.
Yeah, the more early modern stuff.
Another Solomon book is the Key of Solomon, which dates to the late 17th century, and that contains a satanic incantation. That's all I wrote, but bad, I would say.
Don't do that. You
Don't
said
be
this was about the
incanting.
Key of Solomon. I missed what you said.
This is the Key of Solomon. Now,
Yeah.
I think this is not the lesser or greater Keys of Solomon, which
Yeah.
those were both probably.
Yeah, so those were both. They were, Samuel Mathers and Aleister Crowley working
Okay.
together to do it. But yeah, they sort of draw inspiration from them. I don't think that it's the same text.
I don't think so. I think the original Key of Solomon is a medieval.
Yeah, it's its own thing.
Yeah, which obviously they would have had. I'm guessing drawn inspiration from.
Yeah.
Since it's named the same thing. I don't know what's in this book. I didn't look too much into it. It's another kind of bullet point on the road leading up to Christianity and Apocrypha. So I'm going to shift gears now, and we're going to go into ancient Rome, specifically after Christianity was officially adopted. And magic books were often round up and burned in this time period. Why? For several reasons. There's the political reason of that when you're adopting a new religion as your chief religion, you got to sort of suppress anything that could pose a political danger, right?
Mhm.
So you're going to round up anything that you deem, unrelated to your religion and purge it, right? That just kind of goes without saying. However, also you think about in the scriptures, specifically, I believe it's Acts of the Apostles, where the Christian congregations in, I want to say Lystra, Iconium, a lot of those Greek areas who were formerly pagan, were taking their old pagan magic books and burning them, just to symbolize maybe that they
Yeah.
had now
End of an
converted to
era.
Christianity and they followed Christ and they put away, demons. And so this was probably the precedent that Rome was using when we see a lot of these book burnings. But it's important to remember, culturally, they were going through political not upheaval, but big political changes, big cultural changes. So this was a cultural shift.
Yeah, they went from killing Christians to
To
being Christians. So,
being
yeah.
Christians, killing non-Christians.
Yeah, yeah,
in
exactly.
some- yeah.
Which I don't
So-
know, maybe a net improvement. I'm not sure, but
I would say it's a twisted form of Christianity,
Yeah.
especially when it's adopted by Roman emperors.
yeah. To be clear, yeah, we. I'm not a big fan of Nero or anyone who came after. I guess he wasn't
No.
Christian. He blamed the burning
he wasn't.
of
It was
Rome on them.
going to be
It was-
post.
yeah, it was right after him. Yeah.
What was it? Was it Oh man, I'm forgetting.
Like Constantine? Was he the first one?
I think it was Constantine. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
If you're an emperor, I probably don't agree with you politically, but we can
Probably.
understand why these book burnings were happening. It
Right.
wasn't just like, it wasn't like, this isn't like a Daughters of the Witches You Couldn't Burn type situation. This was
Yes.
there's a very clear reason why they were doing this if you examine it within the context of the time.
Absolutely. It's from a historical standpoint understandable. And so I think this is, as we kind of progress into Christendom and particularly Roman Catholicism and move into the Middle Ages, this is where we're going to start to get the beginnings of our modern perception of grimoire and spellbook. Because, around this time, these spellbooks, a lot of them are still pagan religious rites, Greek, Roman religion, Egyptian religion. And now we're undergoing this world power is undergoing a cultural shift, and Christianity is becoming key. So the perception of these books is going to go from religious to taboo, I would say.
Occult. It becomes hidden all of this.
It becomes hidden. It becomes esoteric. Yeah. And ironically, suppression of knowledge, of course, leads to more of this stuff being made and circulated, as it always goes. So we'll go ahead and jump into the medieval period. One thing I think is pretty interesting is medieval grimoires. Like, if you think about the medieval time, the quote-unquote Dark Ages, it's called the Dark Ages because we've lost a lot of history from that time. Because I think we went through a lot of cultural collapses. Not quite. I don't want to say the world fell apart, but if you look at ancient Rome at its height, and then you go into the medieval period when it's declined and it's fragmented.
Yeah, there's definitely a downward trend and a loss of knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. You've lost a lot of that ancient Greek knowledge. The Library of Alexandria has burned at this point.
And I personally am still recovering from that.
I'm upset about that. There's probably some sick books in the Library of Alexandria.
Occult and otherwise. Maybe the real Key of Solomon was in there.
Could have been.
Who knows?
Yeah.
The one actually written by him.
Yeah. But you're seeing, it's important to understand, economically, there's a lot of change. Culturally, there's a lot of change. So it becomes this dark period where we don't particularly have a lot of information. And also, medieval peoples didn't have as much information as, say, Rome at its height did. So the medieval grimoires are interpretations of ancient history and understanding and knowledge, but being reconstructed by medieval peoples often incorrectly. I'd say primarily incorrectly.
Yeah.
So it reflects the medieval view of the world, which is it's a fascinating perspective to look into these, and you see kind of how they felt about the world. Yeah.
It goes
but anyway.
into something that you've mentioned to me that you'd love to do an episode on, and I agree, is different interpretations and translations of the Bible, where very similarly, in this era, text, as we said, written language was an inherently political thing. And that goes into, obviously, your translations of the Word of God. You're going to try and, if you can, skew things in a way that helps your worldview go forward.
Or if you perhaps are looking for a divorce, you might write your own translation of the Bible at King James.
Yeah, I was going to say, come on, dude.
Come on, brother.
But exactly. And so, if that's what the official avenues of religion are doing, it's that sort of thing is only going to be intensified in the taboo occulted areas, because you have virtually no oversight there, as opposed to the dubious oversight you have of the monks translating the Bible. Right.
Yes. I think that's a good point. During the medieval period, with the church, I would say that any pagan book would be considered magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be burned in the name of spreading Christianity, specifically Catholic Christianity, right? And I think it's pretty interesting that at this time, the medieval Catholic Church was having to draw lines of what is magical and what is Catholic ritual.
Mhm.
As we know, a lot of Catholic rites and rituals are not biblical in origin, right?
Yeah, and they did take a lot of pagan rituals and just sort of reskin them. Like
Right.
most
So they
famously
had to come up with a lot of exactly like Christmas. They had to come up with a lot of rules as to what is magic and is not, which I think is pretty interesting. And I think it's going to be one of the many contributing factors in the kind of fracturing of Christianity that you'll see later on.
Mhm.
But like, this is where we get like, people go, oh, what's the difference between magic and religion now? People think they're making a smart point when they're going,
Yeah.
you believe in that. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. But that's, if you think about it, like, how are you differentiating these amazing things you're talking about? And that's
Mhm.
sort of a problem they had.
Yeah. Like, oh no, wait a second. Like
Exactly. So amongst the peoples in parts of Africa, South America, the Caribbean, South Pacific, anthropologists have found a huge notion, a widespread belief that the white man deliberately withheld the full power of Christianity in order to keep these people in a state of subjugation. Now, I had written that down from my sources, but as I'm reading it back, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm with them a little bit.
Yeah,
Because
I can't say I blame them for feeling that way, considering what the largely Catholic groups of people who showed up there did to those groups of people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And considering, suppression of knowledge of the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
When we think about characters like William Tinsdale, and
Mhm.
Martin Luther later on. So it's like, yeah, I can understand why this view was spread. But it wasn't necessarily achieved by restricting literacy in this case, but by deliberately withholding certain biblical knowledge and passages. And in these people's minds, the key to wisdom, knowledge, power, which is keeping them suppressed. And again, suppression inevitably leads to counterculture, right? And in this case, counterculture is apocryphal text, which is, when we think of apocryphal text, it's texts that claim to be biblically related, but are outside of the canon of the Bible, or are just not accepted in modern Christianity. And a lot of this apocrypha is connected largely to, I would say, grimoires. I think they're pretty inextricable.
Yeah.
And we're not going to get into what books belong in the biblical canon, but I think it's important to note the link between those two things, because if you're reading apocrypha, if you're reading the Book of Enoch, if you're reading Maccabees, if you're reading this and that, you're probably going to eventually migrate towards the Testament of Solomon, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So the alternative literary biblical tradition ironically became the source of a lot of magical traditions that would continue on today. And if you were reading a lot of apocrypha, you're probably going to get the same treatment as people reading pagan occultism.
Yeah.
So there's a gradual so overall, to summate, is that a word?
In summation, I guess.
In summation.
Yeah, there we go.
That's about where my chronological line ends, right? So if we talked about Akkad and like Akkadian traditions all the way up to the medieval time. There's a gradual progression of ritual and religious to esoteric and taboo sources of forbidden knowledge. And kind of that's where we started. That's where we got to. You can see along the way how that happened. But by the time we're reaching, would you call the 1800s, 1800s the modern period?
Yeah, I call it like early modern, especially
early
like
modern
an occultist framework. Like that's where the mess that we're in now. That's where it sort of starts to originate. It all begins with Crowley.
Yes,
or probably like Arthur. Is it Arthur Waite? Guy who made like the tarot cards.
Yes.
Arthur Edward Waite. I know it's AE. I just never remember what it stands for.
AE, an evil Waite.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm going to hand the baton off to you here.
Yeah. All right. So dear listeners, we're gonna switch gears just slightly.
Yes.
Now, because I I put my cards on the table. I have several grimoires in my home.
Much to my chagrin.
Much to my own chagrin as well. Because when I was, for a while, I definitely had an interest in magic and occultism. I never signed my soul to the devil. Don't worry, everybody.
Good.
But, I was interested in, I was sort of, what's the deal with this? Let's see what we've got going on over here. And I had a friend who had similarly gone through a phase like that, and he just happened to have a lot of these books, and he just gave them to me. He was very chill about it. He's like, here, take those.
Here, have dark forbidden knowledge.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So
go.
I think I might even have like a copy of the Book of the Law. Like I've got a lot of Crowley actually, and I've read most of it. I can't say I've agreed with all of it, but I've read most of it. And so I sort of wanted to take a look at the lesser and greater keys of Solomon, both of which are, they're both Samuel Mathers. And Crowley helped out with the lesser key of Solomon.
And who is just Samuel Mathers for the people?
Of course. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So Samuel Mathers was an occultist. I don't know a ton about him. I really know of him as sort of a, contemporary of Crowley. But these guys, they were all sort of floating around this same scene in like late 1800s, early 1900s. When did Crowley? Yeah, because so it's 1898 is when he joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is where all this stuff really starts to take off. It's a secret society in I think it was based in London. But so they were a group of like poets, scholars. The sort of people who
weirdos.
The sort of people who would want to like dress up like wizards and do black magic.
Right. Before D&D and Reddit existed, you had to put in a lot more work to be a dork.
Yeah, before D&D and Reddit existed, you had to like do sex magic to begin the Aeon of Horus. And
it was just a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm reading here it was founded in 1887, dissolved in 1903.
Yeah, also as a side note, if the sort of people who do things like call themselves the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and open the Aeon of Horus.
Right.
There were a lot of big personalities in those groups, and they did not always get along.
Shocker.
I want to say, if I remember right, that there was a period where Crowley was like feuding with them, and they just like changed the locks on the doors to keep him from coming inside, which is really funny. Like
that is pretty good.
Being a magician who's foiled by a locksmith.
They're doing ex-girlfriend tactics on Crowley.
Yeah.
But I just noticed that the three founders of the Hermetic Order were all Freemasons.
Yes.
That caught my eye.
Yeah, I was going to say, so there's a lot of crossover between this sort of secret society and things like the Freemasons, other, more secret societies that don't really get talked about much, but that are all, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn is frequently called a paramasonic organization, in that it's similar, right? Like they use rituals. There were levels to it that you would ascend through. And Crowley, being the guy he was, like promoted himself several times, and I think like invented new higher levels that only he could attain. So I want to do a full episode on Aleister Crowley, and just sort of his particular strain of magic, and maybe even just doing an episode dedicated to like Thelema, the religion that he invented.
Creepy Crowley.
But yeah, creepy Crowley. But in the meantime, what you really got to know is that these guys, they're old freaks, basically.
Yep.
They're translating through these things.
And the worst offense possible, British.
They're all British. Yeah, exactly. And that's why I'm opposed to this. Wicca also, just as a side note, so I was digging into that, not related to this, but Wicca was founded in Britain in the 50s. So anytime I felt bad about making fun of it, no, I take it all back. This is not an old religion. I feel no qualms about this. If you're going to worship the horned god, you can't get mad if people call you a Satanist. Sorry, I'm just putting my foot down on that one now.
No, I think that's fair. I did not know that about Wicca.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I want to say the guy who founded it, like, ran a rubber factory during World War I. We're getting off topic, but, like, it's I'll have to look more into that. So anyway, the Lesser Key of Solomon is the one that I really read through. This is like the straight up grimoire. It's considered very important, like in terms of grimoires written in this era, and that's sort of why I wanted to dive into this one. So it's divided into 5 books. It's just me reading off the back here because it's easier than trying to sort through the table of contents. So they're all in Latin, of course. So please forgive me if I butcher these pronunciations. But there's the Ars Goetia, the Ars Theurgia, or maybe Gaetia, I don't know. The Ars Paulina, the Ars Alamedel, and the Ars Notoria. So they are respectively. Hang on, let me find my little list of what each of them is. So the first one is like just that list of evil spirits that we talked about, where it's just, he's just listing out all of your little, like the 72 demons of hell. They have a, and like the hierarchy within them. Let me remember where
Can I ask you, is the 72, is that number important in any way? Because obviously the first thing it makes me think of is the 72 virgins thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, does the number 72 hold any sort of importance?
So I didn't look into its numerology, but it's a very safe bet when you're dealing with occultism. No matter what the number is, it holds some significance or some symbolism, right? Like, with the statue of Thoth being under 666, or anytime like, how the number 33 comes up all the time. Things like that. So my assumption is yes. I can't tell you off the top of my head. I also know that there's in other traditions there's the 72 angels of I don't remember his name, but they're sort of considered like to be the opposite, like the equal and opposite force against the 72 demons.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Hang on. I found their rankings here. So they list out the kings, the dukes, the princes, the marquises, which is the plural of marquis, I guess, the earls, the knights, and all the way at the bottom, the presidents. And I just think it's funny that the president
That's
is
where
like
Bush is.
Yeah, the president is the lowest form of demon. So whenever I'm like talking about the occultism inherent in say the Bushes or something,
right?
Bear that in mind. My eye is open.
Yeah. They're no marquises, I'll tell them.
Yeah, they're no marquises. They aren't even earls.
Sorry, Jeb.
Yeah, man. Imagine you don't even get to be president on the demon tier list.
You're not even on the demon tier list, my man. You're not even F tier. I wanted to. Okay, so obviously, the fun thing about numerology is because numbers can be found anywhere. You can kind of put a lot of, importance on numbers you see recur a lot. Mm-hmm. Because of math. But I just wanted to point out here, there are several places 72 comes up in a lot of, non-Christian religions. It's 72 is the total number of books in the Catholic Bible.
Okay, interesting.
Yes, although most people consider 66 to be the normal 72. It's supposedly, according to the Kabbalah, the number of names of God. It's the number of disciples sent forth by Jesus in Luke 10. In some translations, although others say it's just 70. Obviously, we have the number of demons in the Lesser Key of Solomon. There's 72 major temples which have been found in Angkor, the ancient seat of the Khmer Empire. And also 72 is the number of sects and denominations that are doomed to hell in Islam, according to the Hadith.
Man.
So, and sorry, how could I miss these? Thoth, in Egyptian creation myth, wins a 72nd of each day of the year from the moon in a game of drafts.
Now that,
which is interesting.
Yeah, that one in particular makes me raise my eyebrows, considering that this book is very much a Crowley book, and he was very into Thoth as well.
Thoth. This one will also make you raise your eyebrow. This will be the last one. The good god Osiris was enclosed in a coffin by 72 evil disciples and accomplices of Set.
Yeah, I was gonna say
So-
upset. Yeah, of course, someone who who has say temples dedicated to
Yes.
him out west, founded by members of military intelligence, perhaps. Who knows?
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, dude.
I didn't know about this.
We'll do an exploration of Michael Aquino sometime because he's.
Interesting.
I want to say he was also a member of Disney's Club 33. I know Kenneth Anger was.
Kenneth Anger was a member of Club 33?
Oh yeah, dude. He loved Disney.
Well, that's no surprise.
Yeah, shout out to Subliminal Jihad. They just did
Yes.
a great Patreon episode on Disney. And I had wrapped up listening to that earlier, and I saw the name that you gave our Zencaster meeting. And it's like, oh my god, it's all connected.
That's awesome.
But yeah,
Shouts
okay.
out Subliminal Jihad.
Yeah, so the Lesser Key of Solomon. Here we go. I found in the intro to the book what each of the 5 parts are. So it says the first part is the Book of Evil Spirits, showing how he bound up those spirits and used them in general things, whereby he obtained great fame. The second part is the Book of Spirits, partly evil and partly good. So there's, just to be clear, those 72 spirits, that's not all they list out here. There are so many spirits getting listed. The third part is of spirits governing the planetary hours, and what spirits belong to every degree of the signs and planets in the signs. And the fourth part in this book contains those spirits which govern the 4 altitudes, or the 360 degrees of the zodiac. And then the fifth part, most interesting part in my opinion, is basically it's a list of prayers and rituals that you can do to commune with these spirits, and what he did effectively to do these things.
Right.
So yeah, these are the. Let's see. Hang on. Let me find if I can see anything else interesting in this little section. Gain his great knowledge. Short time he knew all arts and sciences, both good and bad, and from these notes is called the notary art, etc. So that's sort of what the Lesser Key of Solomon is. There's lots of different, it'll show you different keys and seals, especially for each of the 72 demons. They each have their own thing, all of which has each of these demons has his own little domain, something that he rules over. He's got his own symbol. But yeah, anyways, that's the Lesser Key of Solomon.
Interesting.
And so yeah, that was Samuel Mathers. Now
So that's
Crowley.
kind of more of your run-of-the-mill grimoire.
Yeah,
It's
that's
hitting
your
all
run of
those
the mill.
notes we talked about earlier. Lists of demons, magic rituals.
Yeah. It's what you imagine a grimoire to be. You flip
Right.
through it, and I mean, it really does. It's crazy flipping through it, looking at the different seals and stuff. You
It's got those-
understand. Yeah, it's
what-
got the weird, here. Hang on, let me just
Circles
I'm
and
just gonna hold
triangles
up
and-
on screen for you. Just the
I'm
list of the
clutching my
demons.
cross, by the way.
Yeah, each one has their own little
Yes.
seal. Sorry, I just opened this one, and this one, Aloces is the 52nd spirit, and he is his domain is all the liberal sciences, which I thought was very funny.
He's the libtard demon.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't let Alex Jones get his hands on that information, 'cause I can only imagine how far he'll run with it. And now the Greater Key of Solomon is interesting. So Crowley didn't have his hands on this one. This one's
It's
just
all Mathers.
yeah, this is all our boy Mathers. So written 1914, this version. Also, just to be clear, all of these things, they all have 18 editions. They've all been translated by a ton of people. These are the two that are generally the most. They're the ones that are viewed the most seriously, I think, is the Crowley and Mathers ones. But now the interesting thing about the Greater Key of Solomon, or at least my edition, is this is the new edition 2016. It was edited by one Tarl Warwick. And now when I came across that name, I was like, I recognize this name. Who's this dude? So I gave him a Google, and it turns out that is the real name of the YouTuber Sticksandhammer666, who is a right-wing troll, effectively. When you look through what he does, he's known for such charming things as a series of videos on how immigrants are destroying Europe, and he's known as a Holocaust denier. So, and I I don't want to dig on that too long, but I just want to say there is a definite strain of occultism that has ties to very ugly elements of the far right.
Right.
You know, that's especially clear now when we see, like, I think the QAnon shaman is like the most absurd example of that. But it's something, at some point later, I sort of want to, when we get more into how it's all connected, I want to dig into that aspect of it in particular, and like what it is that extremists find so appealing about things like that.
Right.
And that was, honestly, to be real, I didn't love the Greater Key of Solomon. I didn't find it particularly interesting. And that was the most interesting thing about it, was that this edition was like edited by a Nazi.
Which is a guy I've run across in my online dealings before.
Yeah.
So that is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I've tangled with him a couple times on Twitter. But yeah, and it's, I don't know, the Greater Key of Solomon, it's much more of a catch-all. It's just sort of like a collection of various like spiritual things and rituals. And, you know, going back to what we were talking about, because that's really all I've got, because full disclosure, I apparently forgot to save my notes and lost them all. So I've been sort of flying by the seat of my pants here. Just to sort of close, I'd like to note, like, everybody involved in the writing of these books talks about how you should exercise caution when practicing magic. Crowley, pretty famously, attributed World War I to him screwing up a magical ritual that he did.
Which is a lot of credit to take, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, as you say, it's a very Crowley thing to go like, oh yeah, oops, like the greatest bloodshed in the world history.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's my bad, because I did sex magic wrong. But but I don't know. It's something that if these people who had such a foundational role in the way it works now, if they were cautious about it and they thought that power wasn't to be used lightly, maybe don't trust someone on TikTok if they tell you that witchcraft is easy and fun and you should do it for yourself. And that's going to be my little call to action for you for this episode is don't worship demons, don't invoke Thoth.
Please don't.
Please, I cannot stress this enough. Don't.
And I'm going to double that. Yeah. As the resident skeptic of this cast, which is funny considering both of us. I'm the skeptic.
Yeah, as you say, if you know either of us, the fact that either of us is considered a skeptic about these matters is really funny.
But I would say, as the more skeptical person, just don't. You know,
don't do it.
If you're watching Doctor Strange and they're mentioning the Key of Solomon, which they do, he mentions the Lesser Key of Solomon in Doctor Strange the movie.
Oh, dude, I did not realize that.
I know. I was waiting to drop that little bomb on you. So Disney is satanic.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
Oh no, folks.
Folks. But no, like if you're, reading, if you're making fun little stories, if you're doing fiction, whatever. But actual sex magic, if you're getting involved with these circles, you're going to be rubbing elbows with Sticks and Hammer 666 or people of that ilk.
Yeah, go ahead. You can finish. I was
just going to say, from a practical, occult standpoint, be careful anyway. Yeah. That's my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that's something that's always driven me a little crazy about satanic stuff in particular, is people who have to deal with Richard what was his name? The serial killer in the 80s, the one who loved AC/DC. I almost said Richard Gere. Yeah, I was cool to you. Oh man, I think it's Richard Ramirez. Is that it?
Richard Ramirez. That's right. Okay. Yes.
If you're going to say that you worship the devil and you believe in the Satanic Bible, and then someone else says the exact same thing and kills people, right. I don't know. It feels a little disingenuous to go but he didn't get it, man.
He didn't get it, man. Yeah.
That was all a joke where we wrote that. And, maybe if you're doing a podcast about a satanic serial killer, don't end it by saying Hail Satan. Not targeting anyone in particular there, but
tell me off mic.
Yeah, I'll tell you off mic before before we invoke the wrath of one of the largest podcasts in this general sphere.
That's so funny.
But just be careful with this sort of thing.
Be careful. Take a scholarly interest at the very least.
Do what we
do. Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing too. It's even again, taking let's say magic isn't real. Well, we know it is, both you and me.
Yeah, of course.
But let's say it isn't. Even still, you could also fall into the danger of reading about all this stuff and sort of radicalizing yourself.
Yeah.
None of us speaking from experience here.
Yeah, no, I have no idea what it's like to radicalize yourself by reading increasingly weird and insane things.
Because when Christopher Lee said you'll lose your mind and your soul, maybe that's because there are things we cannot comprehend, or maybe it's because you're reading insane stuff too much. So take a walk, go see your friends,
touch some grass,
folks, and don't hail Satan.
Yeah, don't hail Satan.
Please.
Also, before we do our little sign off,
I'd
like to note we have social media up now.
Yes.
So you can follow us at. I do not have my phone on me. I think
got
it's
I got you.
Esoterica, because Historica Esoterica was too long for Twitter.
Yes.
So yeah, HIST Esoterica on Twitter. You can follow us at Historica Esoterica on Instagram. Give us a follow. Let us know if you want, if there's anything you'd like us to cover.
Please.
And we don't know what we'll be doing for the next episode, but
we're gonna have to figure that one out.
Feel free to join us next time. You'll learn along with us.
Yeah.
And remember, it's all connected.
I have met people who claimed to be Satanists, who claimed to be involved with black magic. But as I said, I've certainly never been involved, and I warn all of you, never, never, never. You will not only lose your mind, you lose your soul.